Welcome to this explainer on governing by assurance. Today we are going to dive into a totally fascinating and honestly incredibly relevant question. Why do perfect on-paper digital systems just keep failing in the real world? We'll be drawing entirely from the groundbreaking framework developed by Nichols and Rick Lemieux to really decode this exact problem. We're going to look at why organizations that pass literally every single audit still find themselves making headline news for catastrophic outages. And, well, more importantly, we're going to talk about how to actually fix it.
So consider this incredibly chilling quote that an engineer shared privately. This was said right after a major corporate incident was quote-unquote resolved. And, it just perfectly captures the deep frustration of that illusion of comfort following a massive digital failure. Because the executives patch the immediate bug, they update a policy document, and then just assume the whole thing is handled. But the people actually on the front lines, they know the truth. They know the underlying behaviors haven't shifted at all.
Which leads us directly to what I like to call the ultimate corporate paradox. If everything was green, why did this happen? It's the question executives inevitably end up asking when their compliance dashboards are showing 100% complete health, yet operations still spectacularly crash. I mean, how can a system look so mature on a spreadsheet yet remain so incredibly fragile in practice? Well, let's dive into it. Okay, so here's our roadmap for getting from that illusion of safety to real operational assurance. We're going to move swiftly through the illusion of comfort, paper versus living systems, the create, protect, deliver model, our 7 core capabilities, the QOQM tree, and finally, why culture is the ultimate control.
Starting off with Section 1, the illusion of comfort, and when green dashboards still fail.
So our reliance on traditional metrics has really reached a dangerous ceiling. For decades now, organizations have invested heavily in tools that produce these beautiful, perfectly green status reports. But honestly, they're measuring the wrong things. We need a vital shift from traditional GRC to GRAA. See, GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, is essentially just testing controls on paper. It's asking, are we compliant? It's a lot like passing an open book test in a totally quiet classroom. But GRAA, that focuses on actual resilience. It's about surviving a pop quiz in the middle of a hurricane. Governance, resilience, assurance, and accountability actually test your recovery under real-world stress. The crucial shift here is changing our core question from are we compliant to can we actually recover when things go horribly wrong?
Which brings us to Section 2, paper versus living systems, and the dangerous drift.
This dangerous drift naturally opens up because there are basically 2 competing worlds inside every single company. In one corner, you've got the paper system. Your pristine audits, checklists, policies, the dashboards. But in the other corner is the wonderfully messy living system. This is your engineers' actual habits, their quiet workarounds, the gritty 3 a.m. reality under stress. The paper system tracks vanity metrics, but the living system is how your people truly keep things running, often by bypassing those very rules just because the official procedures are way too rigid. Over time, these 2 systems just naturally drift apart, and that exact drift is where disasters hide.
For a really perfect example of this, let's look at the SolarWinds attack. This was a massive supply chain breach, and it completely bypassed a very strong paper overlay of compliance certifications. The SolarWinds incident shows exactly what happens when we rely entirely on that paper system. A fully trusted supplier pipeline was compromised because the living system lacked an actual, tested feedback loop. On paper, they were fully certified and good to go. In reality, the boundary failed catastrophically.
Moving right along to Section 3, create, protect, deliver, which is a whole new mental model.
So how do we actually fix this drift? Enter the CPD model. Create, protect, deliver. CPD basically shows us that product creation, security protection, and operational delivery are not opposing departments that are meant to fight each other for budget. Actually, they are 3 simultaneous, totally inseparable dimensions of the exact same system. At every single critical digital boundary, your organization has to be able to create new value, protect that value from risk, and deliver it reliably to the customer. And it has to do all of that at the exact same time. When one side overtakes the others, the consequences are incredibly severe. Consider the Boeing 737 MAX. This is exactly what happens when an intense pressure to create and deliver rapidly outruns the mechanisms that are meant to protect the system. Boeing basically prioritized rapid delivery over tested protection mechanisms. The system behaved exactly as it was designed to, prioritizing speed right up until a catastrophic real-world failure. So this balance, it isn't a luxury, it is a strict structural necessity.
Section 4, 7 core capabilities, the DVMS engine.
Okay, so how do we actually run this create, protect, deliver model in the real world without just throwing away all the existing frameworks we already use? Well, the answer is the DVMS overlay, the Digital Value Management System. DVMS isn't some new replacement for your current frameworks like NIST or ISO. It's a really powerful operating layer that just sits right on top to make those existing frameworks actually function in reality. It directly connects your paper frameworks to your living system through a continuous feedback loop.
And this engine runs on 7 minimum viable capabilities. They are govern and assure, plan and design, then change, execute, and innovate. These 7 elements are absolutely required to keep any critical digital boundary reliable under stress. They finally move us away from abstract concepts and push us into testable behaviors. If you're missing even one of these at a critical boundary, like say you have design but you entirely lack assure, that boundary will eventually fail, and it will do so in highly predictable ways.
That brings us to Section 5, the QOQM tree, connecting intent to reality.
But you might be wondering, how do we actually measure these 7 capabilities across our whole system without just reverting back to those useless vanity metrics we talked about earlier? Well, we use QOQM, Question, Outcome, and Question Metric. This is a brilliant branching structure that links a clear leadership intent directly to a practical, totally testable operational signal. We basically use QOQM trees to break down massive, abstract, board-level goals into observable realities at the very edge of the workflow.
Let's see how this builds out in a fictional financial firm. Let's call them Meridian. For a critical boundary, like, say, ensuring no unauthorized access happens during a high-stakes financial settlement, the board sets the root outcome. That's simple. Protect settlement integrity. Then, management translates that down into a branch outcome, strict access controls. And finally, it hits the front lines as a hyper-specific metric signal. They start tracking the exact number of access anomalies that are actively investigated. Suddenly, the board's high-level intent flows perfectly into a measurable operational reality.
And finally, Section 6, culture is the control. We've finally arrived at the real secret ingredient. This is what determines if this entire DVMS loop actually works in practice, or if it's just, more paperwork. The author reflects on his time qualifying for submarine duty. He was literally blindfolded with a bucket over his head, yelled at, and forced to execute a casualty drill. He writes, "It was not knowledge. It was the connection between knowledge and behavior under pressure." It's an intense, visceral story, but it proves that real assurance tests how we behave under genuine stress, not just what we manage to memorize for a multiple-choice written exam.
And to really hammer this home, he shares a chilling story of a submarine tagout failure. An electrical safety procedure failed completely, resulting in a massive discharge, simply because each person in a layered system assumed that someone else had already completed their specific step. The perfect controls absolutely existed on paper, but they meant nothing because the culture didn't enforce the behavior. The system failed because the operators just didn't feel the psychological safety or the accountability to double-check their peers.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that culture isn't just some motivational poster in the break room. It is a measurable capability. Do your people raise concerns without penalty? Are near misses openly shared rather than quietly hidden away? Do your incident reviews prioritize genuine learning over just finding a convenient scapegoat? Because your culture is based entirely on whether your team feels safe enough to surface the truth long before a disaster ever hits.
I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to challenge how your own workplace operates right now. Does your culture optimize for safety or just for the appearance of safety? Think about it, because the answer to that question ultimately determines whether your system will survive its next major test or whether we'll be right back here again in 6 months having this exact same conversation. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this completely changes how you look at digital governance going forward.